Have you ever set yourself a goal of something that you sat down, you thought about it, you realized this is a very good thing for me to do? And as you set about doing it, something happened. Someone discouraged you, someone said something, someone let you down, and it caused tremendous sadness or sorrow, and you just wanted to give up on it. I don't know, maybe you said you want to lose weight and someone said, you lose weight, I don't see how that's going to happen. Or run a marathon, or start a side hustle, or get married, and then you had a really bad relationship, or some things just fell apart with your fiance, and after that you said, I'm never starting a family. This is just a very bad idea. It's a whole lot of pain. I'm not doing it. What is the virtue, or what do we need in order for us to be able to see something that's good, want something that's good, go for that thing that is good, and hold on to it no matter how much sorrow, how much pain, how much sadness other people cause us? That's what we'll be discussing today, and that's the virtue of patience. This virtue is one which I think everyone at some stage in their life has had this situation where you look back on something that you've given up doing, something that you are like, yeah, I remember, I once had this goal. I once wanted to do this thing, and I just sort of gave up because, there was no support, there was no encouragement. People let me down. I just got so discouraged by the people around me, etc. And I just gave up. Then you look back years later and you're like, man, if only I had stuck it out, if only I hadn't given up, if only I'd held on to that dream, to that ideal, to that vision which I had, things could have turned out well. I should not have given up. The virtue which enables us to not give up when things get difficult, but difficult in a very specific way, difficult from the point of view of people making us sad, is patience. Patience is different from perseverance. We'll discuss perseverance in another episode in future. But patience is the virtue by which we hold on to something that we have realized is good and that we should desire and that we should go for, despite the sorrow that people cause us in the pursuit of that good. So patience is a word which many people use every day. It's one of those common words. It's not like magnificence, or even worse, pusillanimity, or even worse, magnanimity. Everyone uses patience, but we rarely understand what it really, really means. And when we understand what it actually means, it helps us a lot in terms of putting it into practice, because it's very difficult to practice something which you don't know well. Or put it this way, it's very difficult to practice well something which you don't know well. So that's what we'll be discussing today. And St. Thomas covers patience in 5 articles of question 136. Question 136 of the Summa Theologica, second part of the second part. And he covers it in 5 articles, which means, this is probably something that's kind of big. It's kind of important. And today I'll just touch on the first article, which discusses whether patience is a virtue. I'll skip over the objections and the reply to the objections and just go to the heart of the answer, where he says, I answer that. So the question is patience a virtue? Whether patience is a virtue. Then he gives 3 objections saying patience is not a virtue because of this, patience is not a virtue because of that, patience is not a virtue because of this. And then on the contrary, Augustine says, the virtue of the soul that is called patience is so great a gift of God that we even preach the patience of him who bestows it upon us. I answer that. So now this is St. Thomas Aquinas' views on whether patience is a virtue. As stated above in a previous article, the moral virtues are directed to the good inasmuch as they safeguard the good of reason against the impulse of the passions. What does that mean? He's saying all the virtues direct us towards what is good, insofar as they protect our mind and our soul. Once we've realized this is a good thing, I should go for it. Now all sorts of emotions come into play, and they try to prevent us from achieving that thing which is good. Think of it as think of the virtues as MMA. Let's use MMA as analogy. You know, in MMA, you've got these like grappling holds when two people fall to the ground and they grapple and they hold on to each other and you're trying to like make the other person submit, right? And there's different grappling holds. I'm not an MMA expert, just watched a few clips here and there, but you get the sense that, you know, people can grapple with their elbows, with their wrists, with their arms, with their knees, with their feet, with everything, like with their shins, they do with their thighs. I mean, they use every single part of their body to hold on to their opponent and squeeze the living daylights out of that guy, right? So the virtues, it's almost as though your intellect, which is the ability to know the truth, and your will, which is the ability to desire what is good, and the true and the good, these are just like, you know, in reality, what is true and what is good and what is beautiful always coincide in the same thing. And then when we analyze it, we just tear it apart mentally. These are mental categories that don't really exist in reality. It's almost like genus and species, you know, like the wolf. A wolf, I think, is Canis lupus, but you never step out of your door and say, oh, it's into a zoo, not out of your door, I hope, into a zoo and say, hey, look, this is Canis and that's lupus. No, you'd be like, this is an individual wolf and that's another individual wolf. Canis lupus is like a mental abstraction we use just to understand nature better. Same thing with when we speak of the true and the good and the beautiful. Those are mental abstractions which we use to understand reality better, because in reality those things always exist together in a specific object or person or thing or being. Anyway, I digress. Coming back to the point. So when your intellect and your will perceive something as good and true and beautiful, and then you want to go for it and you want to hold on to it, that thing, because of your emotions, it will try to escape you. It's like an opponent in MMA trying to escape. So you need to have a variety of ways of holding on to that good and not letting it escape. You need to use your hands, you need to use your chest, you need to use your knees, your shins, your arms, everything to hold on to that thing that's good. And all those different things that you've used to hold on to the good, those are the virtues. So in different ways and different shapes and forms, the virtues enable us to hold on to what is good, despite our emotions trying to make what is good wiggle away from us. So that's what he means. Long-winded explanation of the moral virtues are directed to the good, inasmuch as they safeguard the good of reason against the impulse of the passions. Then he continues, now, among the passions, sorrow is strong to hinder the good of reason, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10. The sorrow of the world worketh death, and Ecclesiasticus 35, verse 25, sadness has killed many, and there is no profit in it. Hence the necessity for virtue to safeguard the good of reason against sorrow, lest reason give way to sorrow, and this patience does. I like these examples very much, and I think that sentence, first time I read it, it's just stuck in my mind now ever since I read it, or read it in this context of patience. You know, many times, at least for me, one reads the New Testament over and over and over and over, and then someone actually explains like a phrase in a new light, and you're like, I get it, then it sticks. One of those sentences has been this: the sorrow of the world worketh death. This is something which I'm sure you've seen, at least I've seen it, where I think the most extreme example of this is when a person commits suicide because they're just like so sad. They're so depressed and they just commit suicide. And then, but then you've got like other forms which are not as extreme, but are just as, I guess, as sad. Typical example where two people who really love each other, let's say a married couple has been married for decades, 40 years, 50 years, and then one of them dies. And then the typical thing is shortly thereafter, the other one dies also, just because they could not overcome the sorrow of having lost their lifelong partner. So that's what this means. The sorrow of the world worketh death. There are different kinds of sorrow, and when we speak about patience, we're speaking specifically about the sorrow of the world, the sorrow that's caused by other people, especially when we want to pursue something that is good. So I mean, there are other kinds of sorrow. For instance, if you're sorrowful over your sins, your past sins, your past misdeeds, past mistakes, that is not sorrow of the world that worketh death. That's actually like it refers to that, the beatitude refers to it, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So this, being sorry about things you did wrong in the past, that's not sorrow of the world. That's not what's being referred to here. Moving on, wherefore Augustine says, a man's patience it is whereby he bears evil with an equal mind, that is, without being disturbed by sorrow, lest he abandon with an unequal mind the goods whereby he may advance to better things. It is therefore evident that patience is a virtue. So there you have it, the explanation of what patience is and why patience is so important, because there are so many things in this, and patience is I insist, it's very important to understand that patience has to do with the sorrow that other people make us feel in the pursuit of the good. Now, when the good itself is difficult, and so it's difficult to achieve because it's such a big task, it's such a complicated task, it requires so much mastery, that has to do with perseverance, not patience. Patience is almost, it pertains more to people. Patience is about people. It's more, you're more likely to say, I need to persevere with a task than I need to persevere with a person. And you're more likely to say, I need to be patient with a person than I need to be patient with a task. So that's an important, it seems like a small difference, but it's an important difference to grasp, especially with respect to how do we grow in patience. Now, I looked through some of the rest of these questions, and there are a lot of gems here. But where I found the best answers for how to grow in patience was not actually under the discussion of patience, because in the previous book, in the first part of the second part, which precedes this second part of the second part, St. Thomas does speak about remedies for sorrow, and that's where I found the practical ways in which to exercise patience. So if just jumping over to that really quickly, question 38, the remedies of sorrow or pain. I think this is probably one of the most, I'd say after maybe the 5 ways of St. Thomas to prove the existence of God, this ranks maybe second or third amongst the most well-known or most famous or most popular passages of the Summa Theologica, where St. Thomas gives remedies for sorrow, and all of them apply to this sorrow of this world that worketh death. And he gives 5 remedies in this question 38. There's a link to it in the show notes, and he gives 5 remedies. I'll just name them. I won't discuss each of them in detail in the interests of time. And the 5 remedies he gives for relieving sorrow or pain is, he says, number 1, the enjoyment of legitimate pleasure, doing something that we genuinely enjoy doing. That can help us to grow in the virtue of patience. Secondly, is weeping, crying. Thirdly, the sympathy of friends, spending time with friends. Fourth, contemplating the truth, or in other words, praying. And fifth, sleep and baths. Sleeping and taking baths helps to relieve sorrow. I was quite surprised when I came across that. But the one which really stood out for me, okay, there are 2 which stood out for me. I'll mention the first one, which stood out for me, is weeping. If there's one thing which I envy women for, is they have this, St. Josemaria used to call it the gift of tears. Women, compared to men, women cry. They find it much easier to just, cry. And I have a theory. Look, there's no one, maybe some guy in a university somewhere is going to do a study, circulate thousands of interviews and stuff. But my theory is that the reason why you find instances of suicide to be much higher amongst men, like where depression gets so bad that the person takes their own life, it's much higher amongst men than it is amongst women, is because, this is a wild theory, it's wild, it's crazy, but I'll put it out there anyway. It's because women have higher emotional intelligence than men, and part of that emotional intelligence tells them almost instinctively that when they are sad, it is they should cry. They should let it out through tears. Men find it very difficult to cry. Maybe it's nature, maybe it's nurture, I don't know. But compared to women, men do not cry nearly as much. And I think this contributes to men's inability to handle sorrow, and the sorrow just crushes them. And eventually you just find many more men just taking their lives compared to women. That's just a theory. It's not backed up by any scientific study. Maybe someone one day will do a PhD on it, publish a book, become a best-selling author. I don't know. But that's just my theory, just putting it out there. Another one which really stood out for me was this, the fourth one, is sorrow assuaged or reduced by contemplating the truth. And he says it is. And in terms of contemplating the truth, he says, looking at God. That's what he means by contemplating the truth, which is another way of saying prayer. And you see, the reason why he says contemplating the truth, looking at God, looking at the divine essence, is it's more than just falling on your knees and just blabbering and saying, God help me, God help me, God. It can be prayer. One of the best descriptions of prayer is, I don't remember which saint gave this one, but said raising of the mind and the heart to God. Like, even if you just sit in front of a crucifix and just look at that picture, that sculpture, that image of Jesus Christ crucified on a cross, and you just stare at it intently, and your mind is completely removed from where you are and you're transported to Calvary. It's like you're there. You're physically there. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to address God. You're just there. You're just looking. You're present. That in and of itself is contemplating the truth. That in and of itself is raising of the mind and heart to God. That in and of itself is prayer. And that is one of the ways of developing the virtue of patience, because it alleviates or assuages sorrow. Which, by the way, is what Saint James in his letter, remember there's a point, forgotten chapter in the verse, but he says, is any of you sad? Let him pray. So in terms of developing this virtue of patience, I think the most practical and the most accessible means to everyone is this of prayer. Why? Because sleep and baths, yeah, you could say it's accessible to everyone, but maybe you'd find yourself in a situation where you can't do it immediately. Doing something that you enjoy, perhaps again, you cannot do it immediately. Crying, maybe you're not that way inclined because you're like a macho man. Sympathy of friends, maybe you don't have a very tiny friend circle, as most men do. Most men have ridiculously small friend circles. But prayer is accessible to every single human being at every waking moment. All you have to do is want it, and there you go. So those are the 5 remedies of sorrow. Sorrow being the sorrow of this world, specifically being that which can drive us away from seeking what we have perceived as being a good thing, whether that good thing is starting a side hustle, running a marathon, losing weight, getting married, starting a family, whatever it is, writing a book, whatever it is that you've said, this is a good thing I want to do, and then someone along the way just crushes that dream. Maybe they betray you, maybe they let you down, maybe they discourage you, maybe it's the crushing weight of the world's indifference that makes you feel like, oh gosh, nobody cares, this is not worth it, why am I doing this? And okay, let me quit, let me not do it anymore. That's the kind of the sorrow of the world that worketh death, and that's where we need a virtue to safeguard the good of reason against the impulse of the passion, and the strongest of these passions is sorrow, the sorrow of the world that worketh death. And for that, it's very important to understand patience, which is that virtue that safeguards the good of the mind against the impulse of passion, especially sorrow, which is the strongest of the passions. And secondly, to understand the ways and the means in which you can exercise patience, and the most effective and the most accessible of those means is prayer. Hence, St. James says, is any of you sad? Let him pray.